Well, okay, so I was just going to do another video real quick. So what do we got on here? This is an F350 tailgate. The clear coat was coming apart in places from a lot of stone chips. You know, this was off of a work truck. Here's the primer we put on, CRE 321, good stuff. What I like with that is it's an epoxy primer, two-part. Once it's sanded and prepared, you can paint right over it, so you don't need to have like 4 primers. You can just do this. It is pricey, but it's pretty good. Now, I'd done a video on this stuff before, and one guy told me about a pro tip. Before you block this out, just to take the roughness and the sheen off, he said, if you go over it with a red Scotch-Brite, just to cut that shine off first, it sands much faster. My only concern with that in this case, because of how I'm using it, and it does work. I will use it for, because I did the bottom side of this tailgate as well. So I'm going to use a Scotch-Brite on that to knock the sheen down before I sand it. But on this surface, I don't want to do that, and the reason why, I suppose you could do that and then just use a guide coat. But if you look right here, you'll see a dark spot. You'll also see one right there. So I'm going to find a random spot over here. Yeah, right above the 350 emblem. Now I'm going to sand the spot. So there was a lot of little dents in this tailgate. There's one here, like I can just barely see them. And what it is the filler, even though it was all boarded, the whole tailgate was boarded, there's places where the filler shrank slightly lower. So I put about, and I didn't go real heavy coats on this gate. I did do 3 coats, but I sprayed it probably not as heavy as I normally would. But there's plenty on there, and I'll show you why. So you should be able to see, you know what, I'm going to pull this off of here. So you can see how it takes the orange peel off in here. So all the orange peel's got to go. This is a low spot. This is a low spot. You know what, I'm going to try to do that with one hand. Now I'm using a block and I'm keeping it flat. See what's happening to the low spot? That's going to be perfectly smooth. So basically, you walk around a truck and you're at the whatever event you're at. Could be a car show, could just be at your buddy's house, whatever. Could be at a wedding. And people walk around it in the sun, and this is going to be some kind of gray metallic color. But anyway, what happens is the sun comes around and hits the metallic, and it highlights all those little dents, which, especially if you're doing this for the first time or whatever, even if you do get a half-decent paint job or a bad one and then you cut and buff it and make it good, that's how smooth you want it to be. Now this is just 180 DA paper that I'm throwing on a Durablock. You could argue to use a bigger one. I think this is fine because all the spots we fixed are small, like the ones I showed you were the biggest ones. But the whole tailgate's riddled with them, so this, as long as I hold it flat. Now here, of course, I went this way, but from here down, I'll go like this, right? And then go like this, which, keeps things level. And even though I'm using this small little block, for this particular purpose, I think it'll be just fine. Now, if I was going to block body filler, which is another way to do this, you could fill this whole panel with filler. Well, then what I would use, let's just take a quick walk over here, is I'd use all of these. So I think this one's your foot. This one's like 16 or 18 or, well, I guess it's 16, which is the same size as the white file boards. And then this one here is just a 6-inch. So you got half a foot, 16-inch. And this is where you'd use that. I didn't know if primer was enough for these aftermarket quarters, so I literally, I mean, we also wanted to match the quarter to the door, so I flooded that with filler. But before I did that, I went maybe 8 inches back, flooded this whole back with filler. I didn't do down low. Those seemed out. Now, actually, this one I did because we had to fix the body line a little bit so everything would flow. Down there was pretty smooth. Like, we blocked it first just to see. So right over the E-coat on the quarter. Now, in that case, because this is just like I say so you can see, and I believe 120. I can't remember what we put on this. Hang on. 180. So what I did is I put 2 pieces of 180. This is also a Durablock, but it's a skinny little one, right? And I basically just kind of go this way, and 2 hands, but I mean, I barely float it lightly. And what it does is it scratches all the highs so you can see all the lows. Let me walk around the car and I'll show you exactly why I do that. So this side hasn't been flooded out yet. Just going to get a better angle. Right, so this is how I got all those highs and lows to show. So wherever it sends off the black, which is basically like some kind of E-coat or whatever it is from the factory, whoever makes the fenders, these are high spots. The silver, the black is your lows. Now here where it looks like it's ground, it's because it is. Here, there, and I mean, I don't know how rough it looks, but it ain't real rough. But those are the extreme lows. So when I take a straight edge, I've got like a 2-foot steel ruler, a few other things. I've got, but anyway, as long as you got a real nice straight edge, what you do is you can hold it up against the car like so, and if you see light coming through, you've obviously got a big sinkhole. Now this had a few little dings, which is what we ground out. This side is not as wavy as the other side, and these were brand new quarters. They're supposed to be really good. I can't say where they came from because I didn't order them. I didn't put them on the car. The guy swore they came from the same place where you get all the AMD stuff. However, I believe the AMD panel goes up to here, where these panels just come up here, and they're welded across the top, which I gotta say, the guy who put this car together, that's pretty smooth, because I also kind of crisscrossed and boarded this, and it was pretty good. We also had to repair all back here, make everything line up with the tail light buckets. This is a bucket. So basically when you put it on, nothing lined up. We had to add a bit of steel and all kinds of stuff. They might just be an aftermarket, and I mean, they could be high-end, but that doesn't matter. I mean, look, these cars weren't perfect in 1969 right out of the factory. If you find an original that's barely touched with super low mileage and walk around, you'd be surprised what the gaps really look like before 4-body jobs. So this is what you got. So basically, I could probably body fill all those really rough spots, put 3 real fat coats of high build. In my case, I'm going to use that CRE 321. I put 3 fat coats of that on, and I mean, it's thick, but then I have something I can board. The other thing I got to do before I do any filler is right here, when I match it up to the door, from here forward, I'm going to flood that with filler. And again, when I say flood, it just means I'm going to coat the whole thing, make it too high. But we're going to sand off of the edge of the door into the quarter. So that's all going to be smooth, line up. I do have to cut with the grinder the quarter down here. It's pushed in. I don't know if you can see that. It's pushed in a little too much. So we're going to cut, relieve that out, and then weld that back shut. You could put a bunch of filler there, but I'm not going to do that, because when I'm finished, I like to know that if you ever had a ding or a dent, if the filler's thin, you might be able to kind of paintless dent it out. If the filler's fat, you're not gonna. So that's what that's for. And I mean, I could technically take a disc and make the whole thing rough, and then just basically, I mean, a lot of guys say this, I think it's 180 or whatever it is, and they sand, you know, with a 180 grit, and they basically say that that's ready for filler. But I think if you do this, I don't think that's going to pinch. And I believe I used a 40 on a spin disc, but I mean, I went real slow. So this is not real deep, but it's aggressive enough. It's going to really bite. Anyway, I've done that and seen vehicles 12, 13 years later that I've done, and they've been fine. So I'm happy with that. But that's what it is. And I mean, oh, just to be clear, this was coated with not epoxy primer the last time. It was just something to get over the filler because I had to leave it to do other work. So now that this is what I'd call the rough. So I'm going to basically give this a scuff off with probably 180 just to take probably most of that little bit of gray primer off. And then we're going to put 3 really fat coats on there and then block sand it. Of course, at that point, we'll probably do like a 220. Well, we'll probably start with a 180 to take that little bit of sheen off real quick. But then we'll do like a 220, a 320, and a 400. And technically, with the type of paint I'm using, this will be a single stage paint. 400 will be more than enough. I mean, I could get away with 320. 400 is what it says on the gallon, but in this case, we'll take it to 400. That'll be as smooth as we need to get it. If it was going to be metallic, I'd probably take it to 500 or 600. And again, just it depends on the paint you're using. If it's a big budget car, the paint goes on thinner but nicer. You do multi-coats. If you're doing the cheapy body, cheapy body shop stuff for collision work, like Omni or whatever, 2 fat coats over 400, it's going to be fine. I know guys get real crazy with that, but again, it depends on the budget. I don't mind painting a car 3 times if you have to get it right, but you got to have the budget to afford it. And in a nice metallic red, that could be like a $1,200 gallon of paint once you get the reducer and the whatever junk you're putting on it, clear coat. So that's basically what it is. Buy these. There's the filter. That's about as good as I've used. So I like those. You don't want to be sucking up any of this dust. It is gross. Yeah, my high-tech tripod that I'm putting my phone on. I use mini bungee cords. But yeah, so can we see that spot? I think you can see right here. There's a dark spot right here, and it's also rough. I'm going to put my hand here just so that I can't get into the chrome. Usually I'd tape around here real quick just to not scuff it. But I'm not going to make you wait around for that. See what I mean by the 45, right? But you don't want it high and low and wavy. So whatever I do here, I'm going to come back, kind of to feather it out as lean as you can. Now keep in mind, this was a beat tailgate. It has kind of a curve to it. Now I did push it down with a tractor and some wood, which we won't talk about. That's not something I'd recommend. It's kind of you do it, maybe it works, maybe it don't. I did have a backup tailgate in this case, but it straightened out good enough we can use it. So this is going to be pretty nice. Once I tape around the decal, we'll have see, it's gone. So this is what you want. And there's enough primer on here that I can bring the whole thing down more. Now, after I get them all smooth where they look like this, I might take one of those longer blocks I showed you, probably maybe the 1 foot, but I don't know, the 16. It just depends on how I feel. And I'll probably do a quick crisscross over the whole thing. And the whole thing will flow as smooth as you're ever going to get it. So this part in here is a little more difficult to get at because when you're doing it, you don't want to go into the edge and cut. However, in this case, the plastic comes down, and I think it comes almost down to here, so it doesn't really matter. But if you break through anywhere, spray a little bit of primer on the little spot. It's not a big deal. You can thin this down as long as you use a high quality reducer. If you just have a few little spots to do, it'll still be super sticky. And if you shoot it on and you don't let it cure for the 3 days it needs, I mean, I think it's less than that, but a lot of guys have done, one guy that I know of, he said they did some shrink testing and whatnot on the product, and they said 3 days just to be safe. Instead of a day, this stuff would be good. But if you go thicker, you know, 3 was like the magic number they come up with. I tend to use it 3 to 5. And again, it depends how thick you put it on. But if you don't want to let it dry 100% and sand it, you thin it down, you shoot it on, dust it, and then you can go in, I forget how many hours it is, but you can basically paint it. Like, I mean, I've done that in the middle of the day and then painted that evening, you know, after dinner, and it's been totally fine. So you can use it that way too, right? Like I say, the thing with this product, this particular primer, it's a 2-part epoxy, but the high build properties it has, and it is a little hard, but if you ever try that, what's it, the Feather Fill F3 or whatever it's called, you got to add other stuff in there and whatnot. And I find it's really hard to cut at the beginning too. So I think this is fine. And what I've really enjoyed about this, when you pick up a gallon, it's really heavy. And I mean, a gallon full of liquid is heavy. But whatever is in here is very, very heavy. It's a 2-to-1 mix, so that's the stuff that comes with it, both those cans. So you get a gallon and a half, but I mean, I've done a lot of work with this gallon, and I think I'm down to here. And when I got it, I mean, it was to the brim full. It goes on fat and thick. I've been doing a lot of work with it. I'm not going through product like crazy. So even though this might be a wee bit more expensive than a few other options, 90% of it does end up on the floor, but that's with everything, right? So this stuff is good. It seems to go a long way. Some guys are saying a 2.0 and a 2.2 or whatever, like really big tips. I think my gun has a 1.8 and a 2.2 tip. And basically, I've just run the 1.8. Now in the case of this tailgate, I didn't have quite enough air. So I did get a little bit of orange peel, but it's really small. That being said, I didn't want to go crazy thick because I didn't have to. Because I know if I use the proper air and do everything the way I should do it, I'll have to do a video with that, you know, setting up the gun and where to shoot it and whatnot. But I find I've kind of went thinner on this because I wanted to see if I could get away with going a little bit thinner. As far as how much material you need, I did all the way around all 4 sides. And I believe I watched a video from the guy at Paint Society. And there's a video where he talks about, it's a fairly recent video. I'd go check him out. I mean, he knows his stuff. But there's calculators on the internet as well, which tells you how many ounces, you know. And in the case when I figured out the tailgate both sides with a couple fat coats, plus this piece that goes inside the tailgate, it came out between 6 and 8 ounces. I did a full 8 ounces. Put the whole 8 ounces on. Now I had 2 decent coats on it, on everything. I still had maybe 1.5 ounces in the gun, maybe not. But what I did is I just came over and it was starting to flash off, right? But you could see where the spots kind of were through it. It's almost like you can see through it when it's kind of wet. And I basically just kind of blended it, all those little spots, with more filler, well, more primer, and then I filled the whole tailgate again, just on this side, because I don't really care about the back. It's going to be under a liner and everything. But I want this to look straight when you walk around the back of the truck, that it's just smooth and shiny, right? Anyway, this stuff works well. You saw me do it in live time with this tiny little block, which sucks. You can imagine if this was thicker, no matter how rough something is, use those long blocks I showed you, you're going to mow through this really, really quickly. And again, you can machine sand it. I know a body guy that does that. He literally takes his orbital sander and he goes crisscross and back and forth. And I mean, they don't turn out too bad. For the most part, they look good. But they kind of look good for, like, you know, 1990s standards. And when you see some of the cars that he's done, and I'm not mentioning any names totally on purpose. This is an older fellow who used to do it way back in the 80s. Things were different. Well, it's really fast to block this even with an orbital sander. The downside with that, I know a guy who had a few cars done at that place, and when you look down the rear quarters, you kind of get that little wave going on. The way I'm doing it by hand, basically that's not going to happen, right? So I'm not a great painter, and I know that, but I can get the job done. But the thing is, if the body's straight and the lines are nice, right? Everybody's seen these. We've used those for years, and they're cheap. You can buy them at any automotive product place. What I did use when I machined down the filler that I put on the Roadrunner, or the Satellite Sport Satellite, whatever you want to call it. I got one of these. Takes these, the same as that white file I just showed you over there, the board file. Now, it only goes back and forth. You can run it crisscross. They're heavy, but you just got to kind of hold it up to the product. And what I did when I did the Satellite, and what size do I got on here? Because that does seem to be important. Oh, by the way, if you have one of these, when you open that, watch it doesn't hit your thumb or your nail. That spring's got enough tension. 80. So yeah, I didn't go too crazy. Now with the hand one, I might do 40 or 36 and then drop to 80, then 180. But with this, I just put 80 on it because I didn't want to cut too fast. But it takes all the rough edges off, because when you're trying to fill a whole fender like that, you kind of end up with spots and spots, like you're adding and adding. So you're never going to get it super duper smooth. And a lot of guys seem to have videos and they show the filler is still kind of wet, and then there's a happy place where you can kind of squeeze it on and squeeze it on. Now, I can get away with that if I do, say, from here to the tire or something like that. But when I do this whole quarter in one shot, that doesn't happen. I mean, I'm kind of putting filler, mixing some more and putting it on. I know they say, oh, mix it all, do it all at once. I mean, I don't even know how long this quarter is. Like, is that 6-7 feet? It's got to be 7 feet long. You know what I mean? So it is what it is, and there's some edges and some extra. And look, when in doubt, put more on than you think you'll need. That machine will take it off pretty quick. And it's literally just to take the glaze and all the high spots off. That's all it is. It's not going to shape anything real well because it won't contour to the car, right? Your board file that plugs into the air, kind of, they might make them that do that. Mine seems to be pretty much just flat. Now that being said, I put it on flat and crisscross. Now right at the front here, the car actually goes in and comes out to the door. There's like an indent, and then it goes the other way. That spot I didn't do that way. I only came up to about here. You could see where it just kind of would miss then. And then I finished that out by hand after. And honestly, I used that. I used the Durablocks. It didn't... I got a few hours into blocking the fender out, maybe 2 hours. Like, it wasn't crazy. There's a lot of work in the quarters, but the blocking isn't it. And I mean, it's smooth. I can take this steel paint stick here. Right, and that fits just like that all the way up. No light will go through. So that's kind of what you want on the whole vehicle. I mean, even if you're not exactly where the factory would have had something, if the whole vehicle, you could run that paint stick, and I do have one of those that's 2 feet long. If you can run that on the car everywhere, everything flows. You know, your car's going to stand out at the show, not so much because the paint's awesome or because the bodywork was super high level, but because you took the time to do it, you know, in a way that you made it smooth. As far as fillers go, Rage is good. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's good. For the rough stuff, hardcore stuff, I use that. It's good. And honestly, if you're board filing with really good paper, you can flatten that out pretty good. But I like this stuff. Now, some of the body shops, according to my paint supply guy, they haven't really liked this CarWorks Optimum Plus. So what I used to use was just the filler. I think it's called White Light or Light White, which is the stuff from these guys, right, from Evercoat. There's nothing wrong with it. It works good. But I find at the end, and you'll see videos on this as well, there's guys that do this trick. they squirt a little bit of that in, say an eighth or a quarter of that in with whatever filler they got on their board. They mix them all up together, then they put the hardener in. What it does is it flows out a little better. It's probably tighter and harder, so it's like a finishing putty. Now, you can use this direct, and sometimes I do. I got a few little scratches that I don't like before a paint job. I'll use that stuff straight, put it on, sand it, and basically you can board it with like 400. You'll eat lots of paper. We're talking little scratch. It doesn't matter if you eat a lot of paper. A lot of paper is like 2 sheets, right? And then you throw them away. But anyway, I tried this stuff, and this is the second gallon I bought. That one's almost empty. This one just showed up. What I like with this, and the reason I think collision shops hate it or don't like it as much, it's nice, it's really smooth, it seems to stick as well as anything else I've tried. But the reason I like this stuff, I used to like to use, is it Evercoat Rage in the big purple thing, which is really good stuff. I also use the Z-Grip. Well, I went from the Z-Grip to this, and what I do with this is I put a little squirt of that in it. So wherever you got welds and stuff, if you got a pinhole you missed, you squeeze that in, that should seal it up. Now back to this. I like it, it mixes well, it goes on good. The downside to this, it does not dry fast. Comes with this, it is red hardener. It's okay, dries real slow. Auto parts stores sell this stuff, which is your blue. Now, if you want to see different areas that you've done, you can switch hardener red to blue, whatever. But it does dry slow, but it sands really nice. This, let me tell you how good I think this works. If I use this, I no longer have to buy those. This was like 40 something dollars. That's $50. You've seen what I'm talking about here, right? Is it because it's better? Is it because it's worse? Doesn't matter. Now, if you're going to use like a real thinned out primer sealer and then paint, you want it really good with this. This, however, is so smooth. When I'm done, I've gotten away with really thin primer, just on its own, not mixing any tricks into it. However, because I use this primer, technically that shouldn't matter anyways. But that filler is really, really good. I gotta say I'm happy with it. Now, if you were in a collision shop, the problem with that particular filler, if it dries really slow, that's not what you want, right? Now, if I put a whole bunch on a quarter panel, I'm probably not sanding it the moment I put it on there. It'll be hours later. And I mean, like for instance, today when I get a little tired of doing the F-150 stuff at the end of the day and I'm starting to run out of steam, I'm going to mix up a big old fat batch of this. I'm going to go do that other rear quarter on the satellite, and tomorrow or the next day. And I mean, the thing is, it takes longer to dry, and then people say, yeah, but you gotta sand it so that it's easier before it cures all the way. You know what? I just let it go. I use the machine to take all the rough off it, and it sands beautifully. So I can do it a week from now if I want to, and it ain't gonna matter. And quite frankly, that little glaze you get on stuff, you don't get a lot of it with that, but I mean, it might keep moisture out. Now, I mean, we don't have an issue with that. I know some places, people have moisture issues. You want to prime your filler right away. I mean, I do the metal usually. I'll hit it with, like if you don't have time to do anything good, put a skim coat of this on. You can almost see right through it, but it kind of etches it, puts a coating on it. That'll buy you a lot of time. I mean, I live in Ontario, Canada. I've seen other guys talk about videos like that too. I think Outlaw Edge did one. Check out his channel too. But he was showing like, he goes, I've had my own cars parked outside in the snowbank, and then spring came, we pulled them in and finished them out. Zero rust. I've tried that using the spray bomb I just showed you, the one step from Dominion Sure Seal. And quite frankly, I've put them out there, and as long as you put it on a little fat, like I wouldn't say just skim coat it, because now you're outside in the weather, I kind of bury that stuff in primer. If I have to put it aside, even for a couple days, this is some guy's car, right? You hear about, these horror stories where something like this, right? There's clearly bare metal showing a little bit on this, especially where I ground it. If I park that outside for a week, you've got surface rust. Now I've got to grind all this again, refix it all. You don't want to do that. But you put this primer on like even like so, and it's a sandable primer as well. You don't have to sand this one, I don't think, but I mean, you can. And if you keep putting layers, it will build, and it is blockable to some degree. I didn't do that here. I just sprayed some of that on with the can when I finished this corner, and this is like nothing. So when I sand that, I'm going to come all the way back. That all goes on the floor. Eventually, this will end up all in epoxy primer. Basically, by the time the bodywork is done, everything is sealed in with the epoxy primer, then boarded out, and then you can paint it. It's the way I like to do it. I could add a sealer to that if I was worried it was a little bit thin. And we might. And again, if you have a couple spots where you break through, this is not bad. But I tend to put a little bit of this in, and I'm talking an ounce or two, you know, add a little bit of thinner to it. And it turns out really good. You can spray that on just as thin as this, and then an hour or so later, paint right over it. This was a super scarred up bumper. Perfect example. It's all been blocked, cleaned. You can see some little spots underneath. Well, that's the bottom. Oh wait, that's the top inside. Yeah, there's something that goes in here. So I'm not too worried about those. But I mean, this was all scarred up. I've got work to do right here yet. Don't know what was going on there. I think that just has to be sanded. But we did the first shot on this, and I mean, it was really rough. And on the Sport, the bottom is different. And on the regular Dodges, it's different. From the same year, it's an 05 Rumblebee. But only the Rumblebee had this one. Like, there's one that's like this, and then one that's like, right? So, couldn't find that. So, as mangled as that was, and beat up, and scratched up, and gouges, you know, I basically cleaned all that up. Put a lot of epoxy primer on it to fix the worst of it. And now there's a few little spots to do, but this stuff is really good. So I got a few spots to fix up on it again, and I'll probably give it one more coat of epoxy primer, and literally just one, which will give me enough to do exactly what we're doing here, because that's already going to be pretty smooth. So one coat, I can do the same thing, but on that, and it'll look like new when we put it on the truck. Anyway, that's enough talking for now. Cheers.